Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you, Max, for this. So I will give you an overview on the scientific design of grants to some extent, and for the purpose is improving the selection of projects. And now I'll start, since we don't have the historian, with a story here. You can see Galileo Galilei, and this man here is not the Pope. That's the Doge of Venice. And this Galileo that just been developing the telescope, they secured some lenses in Venice, and he was a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua. And he actually, the years before, he developed also the military compass and the number of devices that he then kind of sold to noblemen for the purpose of instruction, and also to princes and so on. So he was really well-connected entrepreneur to some extent, scientific entrepreneur. And he was trying to get more money for his job as a full professor at the University of Padua. And eventually, he actually demonstrated the telescope. And he, in the letter that he wrote to the Doge, he was trying to explain that this would be a very powerful tool to have in maritime and land enterprises. And he said that if he would keep it this a secret and show it only to Your Highness, the Doge of Venice. And you can see here the panel of all men trying to evaluate whether this is a good enterprise to fund to some extent. And eventually, in the summer, Galileo was also a private tutor for the Grand Duke of Tuscany, the son of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, who passed away, and then in 1610, young Cosimo became the new Grand Duke of Tuscany at the age of 9, and that's his pupil. Yeah, he became new Grand Duke of Tuscany, and he was really well connected with the advisors, and he also wrote a letter to the new Grand Duke, and he wrote the Starling Messengers, these publication where he discovered the satellites of Jupiter. And he said, now I discovered these, I'm going to discover many more stars, and this will be great for the glory of the state of Florence. So he then got a full professorship at the University of Pisa. It was his hometown, and with a job including no teaching for life, sinecure, so a sinecure. So that was the dream application, the most successful application you can think of. So you can see here how in the beginning the science and entrepreneurship, he was very entrepreneurial in his activities, and he was actually extremely well paid eventually from all this, and how the system of patronage that was important and very essential for funding arts was then transferred to science. And and we think as economists, traditionally markets might induce inefficient incentive into research, and there is a lot of theoretical discussion and evidence on this. And it's quite clear, we think, that research should be funded. And in practice, research is heavily funded. Look at the budget of the NSF, National Science Foundation, and the National Institute of Health receive large appropriations from Congress. And similarly in Europe, we have the Horizon Europe program, and with a budget of around roughly 100 billion in this 6-year period, and now it's a discussion for the next framework. And it's, however, less obvious how we should fund science. And there are different instruments. On the one hand, there are market-based instruments like patents, or also prizes that are more typically ex post, recognizing those who have made important contributions. Sometimes you also can define what you want, and then a researcher will try to aim at that. But grants instead are a more bottom-up approach, whereby you leave a lot of freedom to researchers. And so it's interesting to actually understand how grants operate and the interaction with other instruments, and how to optimally design funding for science. And that's what we are up to. Here, I'm giving you a broad overview of some recent work that is happening in this space, but mostly is an invitation to do more work. So grants, in a way, and this is a very high level, can be a desirable instrument if the market value differs from the social value. And in a sense, we think of patents and pooling research toward activities that are rewarded by the market, where there is market value. But sometimes market value doesn't fully represent social value. And so there is a potential externality. And we think that research creates a positive externality. And but often when we actually give property rights, we exclude access from those who don't actually come to terms with the innovator. And so that might be inefficient. And so grants often have a mandate to actually make research in the public domain, or are given to researchers who aim to publish and make the results widely available. And at the same time, the final outcomes of research are highly uncertain. And maybe if you were to define ex ante what is desirable, you might actually pick something that is actually not achievable, or they might actually distort research. And instead, if you leave researchers free, they might come up with some fundamental insights that might turn out to be useful later. But there is a fundamental issue here, because there is fundamental incentives. If you're giving funds to researcher and allow them to do what they want, they might pursue things which are not in the social interest. And there's this uncertainty really creates a fundamental incentive problem. And there is a reason why it took so long for grants to arise, actually. And you need all the credibility. Galileo was a foremost mathematician. He proved himself, and that's how he managed to get this funding. And otherwise, if anybody come up with an idea, and how do you know that the idea is really genuine? Yeah? Venture capitalists face a similar problem when they finance entrepreneurs. And so there's a fundamental issue that researchers are financially constrained. And patent and prizes deliver resources after the research, but there is a fundamental financial constraints that might not be sufficient. Yeah? This is roughly a broad overview. But clearly there is much more work to actually have a modeling framework and try to explain a bit to just encompass these issues in a model, in a fully consistent model. And now, our perspective, in a nutshell, looks a bit like this. If you think about here, there will be a researcher working and aiming to achieve maybe recognition, satisfaction from research, also promotion, think about tenure, and also eventually material and economic rewards, such as prizes, think about the Nobel Prize, and sometimes open-ended prizes, and as well as patents. And typically this is done through a kind of vertical chain to some extent, but roughly these are important motivators. Yeah? And that clearly is costly, and so you will direct your effort toward activities that are valuable. Yeah? As a researcher. And now, but grant funding, this is what we call the pool. And there is a push here from the top. Grant funding will give resources to researcher. And so, but how does grant want to work is typically works through very much like what Galileo was doing here. Galileo was trying to explain his idea. And so there will be a decision from the panelists, for the panels, and deciding whether to fund or not. And there's an application process. And the actual merit, the value of the idea, or also the work that goes into developing the idea are important driver for the decision of funding. And so, in a way, there would be a prospective evaluation, which is typically imperfect. And then once maybe the funding is given, and then there will be also potentially a retrospective evaluation to see whether have you really achieved what you promised. So there will be a monitoring noise and cost at a later stage. Okay, so initially we're going to focus on this first phase, and I'll give you a simple model to capture that. And then later I'll try to give you some other models about the different stages. But having an encompassing framework, it's still to be done. Now, this is the rough plan. So the approach here to grant making works like this. So we see a fundamental problem of hidden action and hidden information. The researcher maybe has more precise information about the merit about his idea. Not always, but he could have more precise information. Also, the funder could have good information, and he can actually go the other way around. But typically, researcher would have some information about the merit, and that's hidden information. At the same time, researcher also takes some action, which are not directly observed by the funder. There is also a hidden action problem. So we're gonna highlight some insights from information economics and from mechanism design about grant funding, and partly will be based on my own work and partly based on work that's been done in this area with different applications in mind, with broader theoretical developments, which I think are important in mechanism design. In my view, this is a fertile area for application of mechanism design, and then maybe would have to be tailor-made the models to what is specific to this problem. I'll try to discuss that. Yeah? Now, to get started, think about the funding process. And as I said, look at the first stage here, looking at the role of evaluation noise, and think about there are researchers with heterogeneous merit. Please go ahead. I'll take questions as I go along. Yes.
So you're saying this is specific in some ways relative to traditional mechanism design contract theory problems? Can you give like some overview of how it's different?
I will. The key issue sometimes is that there are relatively limited, ability to transfer funds to some extent because you're giving funds to people. So that's a fundamental issue that makes it a bit different. So there is a lot of work in the recent years on mechanism design without transfer, which is particularly relevant to this application. Yeah? And in a way, initially here, I'm going to look at a simple framework that has researcher with heterogeneous merit, and the funder wants to fund the best researcher with the highest merit, but will only have a noisy signal about the merit resulting from the panel evaluation, and here as a limited budget. We fund the best applicants within the budget. Clearly, the broader question is, to design optimally the budget, but the framework can actually be quite flexible and is the building block. Here, the timing is as follows: researcher, knowing the merit, apply the cost. It's very, very simple. And then the funder observes a signal about the merit of the applicants and decides whom should be funded among the applicants.
And you think of the signal as noisy, but not systematically biased in any way.
Yeah. In a way, you can also allow for biases, but mostly here, I'm particularly interested in the noise, but in a way, could be biased for some researchers and against other researchers as well, and maybe the researcher doesn't know in which direction it is biased. But in practice, the framework is flexible. It can also allow for bias. Here, we're not focused too much on the bias.
I'm thinking of things like conservatism in terms of topics and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that's not the focus here, but the framework can also encompass and has some implication for that as well. Yeah. Now, so how does the model work? On the supply side, the funder awards grant to applicants who are evaluated sufficiently positively. And so if you are evaluated better, you are expected to be of a higher merit. So the funder funds the best out of the applicants within the budget. Now, on the demand side, the researchers apply only if they merit is sufficiently high because they think they're more likely to be evaluated favorably. Application is costly, and so they economize on that. And so there is self-selection of applicants on the demand side. High merit researcher think that they are more likely to be given a grant, and so they will be more likely to apply. So only sufficiently high merit researcher find the application cost worthwhile. Yes.
The cost exogenously given?
Yes, exogenously given, and the simple parameter here for now. Yeah, is really the simplest model you can think of. And so the advantage of this framework, it can really give you a simple and important insight, I think. So what I've done here, just to explain how the model works. So think about here is the applicants. Here are the best applicants and these are the worst applicants. There's going to be a marginal applicant theta hat, which is just indifferent with applying and not applying. Yeah. And so by getting the grant, you will get a value here, and the probability of him getting a grant is this probability here. It will be equal to the cost of applying. It will be just indifferent. The marginal applicant, that's the demand condition. They will determine actually who is the marginal applicant. And so this, given for now, think about given what the evaluator does. So there's going to be a probability, it's going to be increasing, and so if I am intuitively, if I am an inframarginal applicant, I think I'm more likely to be above the threshold that gets me funded. And so I will have a higher probability of being funded. Yeah. So what happens on the supply side, the budget, which is available for grants, has to be equal to the total winning probability of the applicants, of all the inframarginal applicants, the marginal inframarginal applicants. So the area here under this winning probability will be equal to the budget that would be the other condition. These are the two equilibrium conditions, the demand and supply. They have to be simultaneously satisfied in equilibrium. These will be equal to the budget of grants available. And so the question we are asking here, what happens if the evaluation becomes noisier? So what does it mean to become noisier? And in a very general way, is that the inframarginal applicants now, if you want to keep the same marginal applicant indifferent, the inframarginal applicant will win less because the system is less meritocratic. So they will win less. And that's what I have here with the orange line curve. So if the applications were not changing, the same inframarginal applicants were indifferent, all inframarginal applicants who are better are going to win less. Intuitively, if the information is perfect, they're all going to win probability 1. If it's imperfect, it's going to be flat. And so the winning probability of the inframarginal will go down. So what does it mean now for the equilibrium is that there is a fixed budget of grants available. There are going to be some leftover grants, correct? It has to be that more research supply in equilibrium. And so because there are these grants left over, so in equilibrium, it has to be that the standard adjusts compared to the level so that
Sorry, Marco.
Yes, sorry. There's a good point to stop for a question. Yeah. Okay, it is there, but just go ahead. Yes.
So what you're doing here is you're saying the process became noisier, but you still want to maintain the probability that guy gets a grant.
Yes.
And that means that everyone above them has to be approved with a lower probability.
Exactly. It's a step in the argument, correct?
Okay.
Suppose that's the case, clearly they will win less, there will be much leftovers. It has to be that in new equilibrium, there are going to be more applications so that basically the area on the new curve is going to be the same as before, necessarily. So more meritocracy means a winning probability that is flatter intuitively, and so then there's going to be more applications in equilibrium with a less meritocratic system. Yeah. So it's very intuitive. Noise will basically more people who want to apply.
So noise is in the secondary stochastic combinations.
Yeah. So it's information in the sense of Lehman. It's a bit technical, but that's the more technical bit, and it's all in the paper that this issue of the QJE this month. Okay. So now more applications, and so of lower merit will have to come in. Yeah. Now, so this is just a starting point in a way. So many large institutions allocate budgets across fields based on applications. Now, this is what they're doing. They're saying the key problem they have is how much money should go to different fields. And so what they do, they develop a system, mostly the NIH in the 80s, based the pay-line system, whereby they allocate funds in proportion to applications. And if you think about this, the implication of the theory and extension is that what would happen if in that case, and think about two fields that are identical, make one field a bit noisier than the other. Yeah? Then the field which is noisier will attract more applications. If they have more applications, so they will have more grants, because grants are in proportion to application to equalize the pay line. Yeah? And what does it mean is that there will actually more funds, the budget will actually increase as application increase with noise. Yeah? And so this process will go on and will establish an equilibrium in this setting, which is, and you see intuitively noisier field will receive more applications, even more so because the budget will increase to the system. And a field, actually, if you think about it, if you consider a field with perfect evaluation, suppose that we all know in that field that the applicant knows where he is in the distribution, and the top 10% of applicants are awarded the grant, and I know in the top 10% I will apply. But only 10% of those apply can actually get a grant, means the only 10% of those will have to apply, and you keep going, it will unravel. So if you have a field with perfect evaluation in equilibrium, no researcher will apply. Yeah, and it's just symmetric information destroys this kind of node market, and it's a bit of a extreme version, the opposite of what we are familiar with, where asymmetric information destroys the market. It means no market is destroyed by symmetric information. It's much more boring. Yes, please, Carol.
Has anyone tried to, is there any empirical evidence
Yeah.
that this is going on?
Yes. So basically, the paper looks at what happened in 2014. The ERC changed the rules, because until 2014, the proportional allocation rule was used within disciplinary domain, social sciences and humanities. Within that was proportional. The panels were allocated in proportional applications, and life sciences and physical science and engineering. But in 2014, they decided to have a proportional allocation across the board in all fields. So that means, for example, mathematics, which according to our evidence has much more consensual evaluation, will then compete in the pool with all the other fields. Yeah, and the result of that, actually, our evidence shows that the fields with more consensual evaluation suffered, and the fields with more heterogeneity in the evaluation, or it's more difficult for applicants to know roughly intuitively how they're going to be perceived, there were more applications that got more funding. Yeah, and that's roughly the evidence that we have about this. So the mechanism, please.
Can you do things like, try to look at this is the number of research and active people I think are in this field, sort of hold the field size fixed? Do you see people are right now, instead of this one person, instead of applying every 3 years, they're applying every year? You see things like that.
Yes. And now, it would be nice to have that kind of evidence, but we don't have that as yet. But I think it's wide open. This, it's a great opportunity for research to actually put more. And this is just, I just want to illustrate. There is some initial evidence of that, but there's much more work to be done. Yeah. Yes. Alessia's the data. There you go.
But then it means that physical science and engineering, there is more agreement.
Yeah, there is a relatively, where there is more agreement in the life sciences, according to our evidence. And so they suffer the most.
Yeah, but physical science and social sciences,
there is more disagreement. There's more disagreement. Yes, that's what where they have. I mean, that's what we combine this data from the ERC with detailed data from the Research Council of Norway, where we have evaluations and we can see the agreement among reviewers there. Yeah, and so
agreement could mean all kinds of things, right? It could mean low noise. It could mean just some other way of coordinating on some.
That's also true. That's also
because finches on their own islands doesn't mean that
that's also
a red beak is optimal.
Clearly, there could be, but agreement it seems to be consistent with the story. Yeah. Now this is roughly. I just want to set a bit the stage. Let me just maybe. There you go. I'm getting there now. Let me get to a second story here. Now, what about instead investment in the quality of your application? The merit itself is endogenous; it's not like an exogenous type. And then a key concern here is that maybe researchers spend way too much time preparing applications. And so there is all the evidence how long it takes to write a grant application. And there is some recent work also surveying professors who are both active in research and teaching, and they've been applying. In the last years, they spend 15% of their time preparing grant applications. But this could be maybe productive time, because by preparing an application, and actually what Kyle Myers argues, that is actually quite a useful activity. But partly can also be maybe if you are not funded, that could be wasted. Yeah? Because now, or also could be persuasive. You're spending time persuading that you have a good project and just beautifying your application. But it's certainly costly. And how should proposal be evaluated to induce the socially efficient effort? That's the question. Here is like a simple toy illustration of ongoing work Justus Preusser, and it's related to a nice paper by Morgan on the limit of meritocracy. And so think about here, there's a unit mass of exactly identical researchers, and clearly introducing heterogeneity is interesting, but for now, look at this just to illustrate the idea. So they were all identical. There is a benefit from winning a grant, and there's a cost C for exerting effort, and those who have the highest effort will get the grant. Now they're all identical, and the grant maker only has a amount B less than 1 of grants, cannot fund everybody. Yeah. So as I said, if you spend effort E, it will cost CE, and that will result in quality E. But the grant maker will serve a noisy, potentially noisy measure of the merit of the application, which is the effort plus this noise. As before, the researchers with the highest signal will be awarded the grant until the budget is exhausted. Yeah. So which level of noise here maximizes the equilibrium welfare? Yeah.
One question. Here, there's no sense of risk aversion from the social planning perspective. Is that correct?
Yes. In this setting, so especially in this simple model, is there is, but in general, it's a very interesting question to add those considerations. So we here, it doesn't play an important role in this setting. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about the funding agency, for instance, JPOL and so on. That maybe you may want to allocate more budget to well-known researchers just because you know that the project is going to less likely fail afterwards.
Yeah. Yes, it's very interesting to look at potential biases due to how the evaluators, is potentially perceived and the objective of the evaluator. It's very interesting. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Another question: the grant size is fixed for all. As we're discussing here.
Yes.
You looked at other margin, right? You have to kind of more smaller grants, or
Because
it might be somewhat similar to noising up.
Yes. So it's interesting. For example, at the ERC, the grant size happens to be fixed across field. You might want to have potentially different size of different fields, and it's also slightly different for junior and senior. And in the data there, you see that most applicants apply for the highest amount allowed. It's also distortion there because university administration push in that direction.
Yeah. And the evaluation criteria is unrelated to the cost.
Yeah.
It's just excellence. So if you get the money, you get the money.
Potentially, yes. But also, it's also quite interesting to the design of the size of the grant. And also, the more general question is how to design, the fields are very different. They have very different needs for funding. And we would love to have something which assists them that really tailor makes the grants for the need for the field. Yeah. But here, I just look at the simple, question, which is slightly different, and it's what is the optimal evaluation noise in this context. And so now, in a sense, the evaluation noise here impacts the incentives. Intuitively, if there's a lot of noise in the evaluation, then there would be little incentive to exert effort. Yeah? So you can actually increase effort by increasing accuracy, reducing noise. And so all those participate here, they're identical in this simple setting, so will exert the same effort. But some agents will participate here, some researchers will participate, fraction alpha will participate, and the remaining fraction will not participate and will exert no effort clearly. Now, so what's the impact of the noise? On the one hand, more noise, less incentives to exert effort will decrease, but also will increase participation. And it's very intuitive. And so, but in a way, you can identify indirectly by choosing noise, I'm choosing the effort. What is the effort I want to implement? That's the question we can ask here. Yeah? Now, and suppose now, for the sake of argument, that a fraction alpha participate of researchers and symmetrically exert effort E. And each researcher will expect to win with probability B, which is how many grants are available, divided by the participation share. Yeah, and so utility from participating would be this the winning probability here would be V times that minus the cost, and and by not participation you get 0. So in a way, everybody will participate intuitively. If you are asking them to do little effort, they all participate. With with a lot of noise, the effort will be low, there will be a lot of participation intuitively. If instead you ask them to do a high effort, higher than this level, correct? So there will not be full participation. Yeah? And so intuitively, so in this case, they will all participate. They will have a rent. Yeah? While in this case, there will be no rent. You're just indifferent with participating and not participating. So then a fraction will be indifferent with participating and not participating. Yeah. So the question is, what is the optimal level of effort in this context? Think about the equilibrium welfare. Is the founder's payoff as B grants times the effort exerted, and because at the end B grants will be awarded. But there is also a researcher's rent. There's a payoff the researcher gets that can be potentially be positive if you have a lot of noise. Yeah? And that's advantage potentially having noise, and you are guaranteeing some rank for the research.
But just conceptually going back to my question,
Yeah.
if you could just design the size of grants as you want as a function of E, for instance,
Yeah.
this would always be dominated by no noise mechanism, right? Where you just award a grant as a function of E, in equilibrium that everybody will have the same E, but
Okay, so so
the reason that noise is optimal here is only because you're restricted to a 0-1 decision.
Yeah.
So you can always complexify in other ways.
Yes. So yeah, there are interesting issues to be. I agree with you. To have a more flexible mechanism, clearly you can achieve much more. Yeah. And so here, but I wanted to show a bit some basic intuition here. That is just a more basic observation here. A first best solution here would actually have that only B researchers should participate, and they should exert this level of effort. But you should basically have only B people participating and doing this level of effort. And now we have potentially here, different inefficiency that will arise in this simple context. Is on the one hand, you can have a level of effort here, that you implicitly can implement with a level of noise. So if you have a noisy evaluation, so the optimal noise evaluation will actually induce full participation, and so that the conditional on the fact that you have the full participation, this is the optimal level of effort, yeah? And so there will be a range, so all researchers participate, exert the effort, and maximize the researcher rank, conditional full participation. There will be two inefficiency. The efforts will be too low compared to the first best, because the first best, the marginal effort should be equal to 1, not to B. Yeah? And the participation is too high right to the first best. Yeah? So this system is not very meritocratic, there's little effort, and there is too much participation. Yeah? Alternatively, what you can have a system without noise, but what you have a dissipation of the rent. So there will be little participation, but but very high effort, so that there is no rent. That's how you induce no participation. Yeah? So the efficient share of participants of researchers participate, but the effort is so high, so to deter participation, and so you have no rent. That's roughly the comparison. And for intuitively, if the budget here is high, you want to have a system like this. This is better than this. These are two inefficient systems. Which one is better? And sometimes having noise, it can actually be efficient in this setting. This is a very simple toy model here. Yeah.
If I think of writing grant applications, I've got an idea which is either a good idea or a bad idea, and the effort is in how beautifully the application is crafted.
Yeah.
Which the only social value of is that it would give the funder sort of a more precise thing of how could you want to go.
That's good.
Yeah,
It's not. Yes, but there is also an effort before coming up with a good idea, and that's what it captures here. I agree with you. That's also an interesting trade-off.
That's just a light bulb going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to get a light bulb, you need to do some work before, correct? Yeah. Okay, but that captures this other effect. I agree with you. That's also an interesting natural model with you have in mind. Clearly, this is wide open, and I'm just trying to illustrate. This is how you see the simple economics of the problem here. So these are the two systems here. So typically the efficient will be somewhere like here, and so there will be this is the noisy evaluation here, the optimal noise. Within noise is the optimal level of noise evaluation, and it will be this is the total payoff, social payoff generated, and here it happens with a noiseless evaluation. It will be here. Yeah. So in this case here, when the budget of grants is relatively high, is better to have noisy evaluation. Yeah? And instead, when the budget is lower, is better to have perfect evaluation. Yeah. So that's roughly the yes.
But the first best contract would be the one that's linear in E, basically without noise. Right?
Yes.
Something to set to it.
Yes. So in a way, you would want only B people to participate, and you want to do a higher effort. So is the point. So one.
So I'm just belaboring the same point about the noiseless but continuous incentive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just make the research the residual claimant basically.
Yes, and that would actually solve the problem. Yes. Yeah. Now in a sense, also, going back here, we consider equilibrium welfare, as I told you here, the rent and the funder's payoff. And Morgan, what they considered, and then in line with the context literature, they look at the maximization of the total effort of participants. Yeah? And so, but in reality, if which is a natural objective, they first don't take into account the researcher's rent. And they're also saying, whether you're funded or not, effort is a good thing. Yeah. In practice, maybe only if you're funded, that effort is productive in this setting. Yeah. And but if so, that changes a bit the solution in a way. And so if unfunded research cannot conduct research, their effort is wasted. In which case, potentially the right objective is this one. Yeah. So now. If you instead looking at the total effort, and that's what what you would have, if you have a context cost. So what you have is that if you want to maximize the total effort, yeah, and so so what you have is that the total effort increases in noise initially, and then decrease in noise. You have an optimal level of noise there as well, but for a slightly different logic to what we've been trying to highlight here. Yeah. So just maybe I wanted to discuss also some broader work, which is not specifically designed for this application, but with a broader set of applications, which is very interesting work by Augias and Perez-Richer. And what they have heterogeneous researchers. They're different by the initial merit. And the researcher can exert effort to improve their merit, very much like here. And the final merit is observable. They ask, what is the optimal monitoring structure in this context? So the optimal rule for maximizing the final merit of funded, if the type density is decreasing, so more generally, it's still a bit of an open question, but it's natural to think about if most system you are focusing on the best researchers, so the density of types is decreasing. And so you would fund with probability 1 if the final merit is above a certain threshold, and otherwise you don't fund. That's basically it's a very intuitive result. And so and you can implement that with a noisy evaluation, whereby if the final merit is above a threshold, the signal perfectly reveals the merit, but otherwise just says that the merit is below the threshold. So now, yes.
Is there some work where instead of saying that I can improve my merit, what I can do is that I can reduce the noise that the evaluator will observe? So I'm thinking, for instance, I have a very good idea, and maybe we are a group of researchers that are at certain institutions which are not famous. So then I try to contact first a very famous researcher, then I put the researcher on my grant, and then apply to my grant. So now I'm going to pay a cost, and the cost is associated to reducing the noise, but I don't increase any merit. The merit remains the same. And typically also, if I want to put that person right in the grant, I can think about this as reducing the noise rather than increasing the noise.
It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, that's what Ian is suggesting. By investing more, I will make it clearer, it'd be easier. And so you might think that there's some, those who have good ideas, they want to make clearer, the content of what they're doing, and maybe those who don't have very good ideas who want to confuse. And so there is a bit of work in, I know of a paper by David Mayat and I think Tarun Dewan that looks a bit at this in a different context, and it looks at the incentives for different types, whether to actually make it clearer, incentive clarity, or obfuscation, and that this insight could be relevant here. And basically, many insights we have from information economics can actually be adapted to this context. This is a fertile ground, I think, to do so. I think that's, yeah.
This might be slightly different, but
Yeah.
I also hear that funding agencies are very opposed to funding things where they just are it's unclear what the idea sort of may be very good and even an expectation very good, but they just dislike uncertainty. And so people spend a lot of time doing work that's going to resolve the uncertainty before. So that, the example I think of is in structural biology. It's like first you have to crystallize the protein, and then you use that crystal to figure out the structure. And both parts are labor intensive, but the first part is very uncertain. And they have a little phrase where they say, no crystal, no grant. So you need to have the crystal already to get the grant, because if that uncertainty isn't resolved, the funders aren't interested. I don't know if that's quite the same as the discussion we're having, but
Yeah, no, I think, broadly speaking, beyond the model here, I think in practice is there's a fundamental uncertainty problem, is that if you, give him money, so anybody who want it, you need to have some guarantee that there is some real effort underlying, and this is the real fundamental problem there is underlying. So understand what the funding agency do. Sometimes they go overboard, but there is a reason why they do so. Otherwise anybody can get the funding.
There's also kind of
You need to have some preliminary results typically, and you need to have some, to be seriously considered. Yes, go ahead.
I think this is the more general version of the point, where novel ideas seem more uncertain. If you're doing something conventional, it's kind of easy to see that's a certain thing. You kind of know what's going to happen.
Yes.
If it's kind of a new paradigm, who knows?
In a sense, there are a lot of novel ideas that are potentially not relevant, correct? We need to actually, how do we know what novel idea really will turn out to be successful? That's a fundamental million-dollar question that is difficult to evaluate, correct? And so that's why often grant makers need some evidence. You already achieved something, you already have a crystal, you already have something to build upon.
Can you explain how to shift, to tilt more toward risky ideas, the financing of risky ideas, instead than just building upon blocks?
No.
Because as an example, for the ERC, in principle, on paper, the idea is to finance high risk, high reward kind of research, because those are the kind of research that would not be financed by the member states. But then when you look at empirical evidence, measurement of riskiness and the innovativeness of the proposals, those are not the proposals which, ceteris paribus, are mostly likely to be financed. And that's why then, if you want to win the ERC, you end up financing something which build upon the blocks of others, but not a breakthrough or new. So I don't know whether that you can explain on how to shift those instruments toward their pretended objective.
I mean, I think these are interesting claims, and I think there's more work to be done on this. But my view is that it's easy to say they don't pick breakthroughs, but it's very difficult to identify them in reality. So yeah, that's the fundamental issue here.
It just seems like it costs money to resolve the uncertainty. Like it's not for, so someone needs to be funding that. And I think what ends up, at least in the US, happening in practice is that people write a grant for research that they've already done. So it's very low uncertainty. They get that, and then they use the money. They really use the money to do the experimental new stuff. The results, and like that just seems like, I don't quite know. That seems like a bad way to do it, because you're evaluating something that the money's not actually being used for, but maybe it works fine.
Yeah. So the model I have a bit later just speaks to that very much. So yeah, let me let's think about evaluation cost now before we get there. And so so again, maybe there is the key issue here. We're looking at the fact that the actual evaluation is costly, and so maybe the grant maker is trying to economize on that cost of evaluation. And so what's the optimal design in that context? And there is now this nice paper by Ben Porat, Dekel, and Piccione that again is not specifically designed for this application, but I think it has important insights for this. So there's one grant, and it'd be interesting to actually look at a more general model with more grants, but n applicants, and the applicants only care about being funded, and each applicant has a privately known merit, theta I, and the merits is IID across applicants. The grant maker's value for funding the application is theta I, and the grant maker can verify individual merit by paying a cost. By paying cost, you will know the type theta, but people will actually claim their type, and then you have to announce a mechanism. That's how it works, which specifies verification and funding decision as a function of the report by the researcher who is applying, and possibly the verification and the result of the verification. And for example, you can have a mechanism like this. You don't verify, and then you allocate at random. And that's the collection mechanism. Or you can verify all applicants and allocate to the best. But can you instead leverage the information the applicants have? In a way, intuitively, you want to do so and economize potentially on this verification cost. How to balance this allocative efficiency with the cost. And okay, good. So the optimal mechanism looks like this. The grant maker announces a threshold, T star, and applicants report their private merits. So if all reports are below T star, the grant maker chooses the winner uniformly at random. Nobody makes a claim to be above a level that the grant maker announces, then the grant is allocated at random. Instead, the highest report is verified and funded if it's truthful. An untruthful verified report and never funded. So the grant maker could allocate to the highest merit with probability 1, but this is too costly. Intuitively, And that makes sense, though the actual argument is far from trivial, I must say, for this result, and for many of the other results I showed you. Then the fact that the evaluation is noisy, evaluation is costly, introducing indirectly noise, and I would not evaluate all the time. So now the other, maybe going back to what you were saying here about this dynamic as well structure of grant evaluation, and this looks at this the second stage, the effort, the researcher maybe once he gets funded exert efforts, and then there is monitoring, and then potentially also repeat applications and so on. And now one of the first papers actually in this area is by Maurer Scotchmer, and that this is a simplified version of this. A bit works like this. So now we have a hidden action problem. After receiving the grant, the researcher chooses how to use the funds. And maybe, if you're at the end of your career, maybe you might go to a conference and you don't bother because you're not going to apply again. But if you know you're not going to apply again, you have an incentive to actually deliver something, so you're going to get a grant again in the future. That's so potential conflict of interest arises between the researcher and the funder, because maybe there are things you can do with the money that might not be in the social interest, and working on the proposal instead, it might be actually costly for you. So the potential conflict of interest is that private benefit is more for the researcher and the social benefit than up in the funder line, these incentives. And so, so suppose the funder has a signal about the researcher choice, for example, lack of publications, and then it can introduce a tool to affect the incentives by temporary exclusion from future grants. Or the other way to put it, you published, and then you're going to get a grant. That means you have an incentive to publish because you know you're going to get more grants. And so you can also split the grants into stages and so on. So if well designed, the incentives for the grantee align with the preferences of the grantor for the funder. And so that, if you look at the private benefit minus the punishment, is actually less than and so you want to pursue the socially valuable activity as a researcher. Yeah, that's the main idea. And that way you align incentives. So now, just wanted to introduce and then leave open a bit the floor for discussion. Some really simple models here. So in a sense, we talked about randomness in various forms is prevalent at many stages. What we said is evaluation noise shapes cell selection into application. And in a sense, if you have more noisy evaluation, there will be less cell selection. Or the other way to put it, if you have a better evaluation, you are going to have a double dividend. You have a more signal, better signal for those who apply, but also you have a better people applying. So a double dividend of information. It's very important to have really informative evaluation. Yeah. And now, but clearly if evaluation is costly, then it might be actually optimal to have some randomness because it's costly. If you have a perfect evaluation, it will be very, very costly. Yeah. And also we looked at noise when monitoring effort, and issues about the rent that the researcher gets and so on. Yeah. So in a sense, randomness can be beneficial or detrimental. Random allocation allows economize an evaluation cost, but may interfere with application and investment incentives. Yeah. And now, clearly there are many interesting issues. So how to deter wasteful persuasion effort, especially in a model where the effort can be both persuasive and productive. And then how to steer the direction in the right direction of research in a way that is socially productive. And one key benefit of grants is leave freedom to the researcher, but maybe too much freedom, is. And if you think about, going back to Galileo had to persuade, this princess that what he was doing was useful. Yeah, and so that is potentially also an important discipline. Yeah, and clearly there are challenges when we are combining retrospective and prospective evaluation. And in particular here, most of the literature is looking at, for example, patents. The pull factor has attracted a lot of attention. Now there is some work on the push factor, but looking at the overall design of push and pull together, I think is a very important area for research. And so, and as I said, most of the theoretical work has not been really tailored toward grant allocation. And so they are relatively simple models and sometimes adapted to this context. It's very important to add important institutional details for this. Okay? So maybe going back here to the picture I had at the beginning. This is the pool here. And it's important also to look at the broader set of what the researchers are interested in. They're not only interested in money in a sense, but also satisfaction in their job, recognition is a very important drivers for researchers. But also the monetary aspects and the link to the innovation channel of patents are very important as well. And depending on the field. So combining in a way potentially the design of pool in a way that is maybe goes in the socially optimal direction by maybe making the funding and linking it to commercialization, for example, would be interesting. So some fascinating work on advanced market commitment that really tries to do a bit that, giving initial funding, linking it to the final adoption in the market. Yeah, and more work in this area, I think, it's very important. And so, but even modeling these ingredients together, I think could be useful. Yeah? So that's roughly the overview I want to give. Mostly open questions and call for more work.
So if I want to think about like prizes and grants,
yeah,
the same sort of framework.
Yeah.
Would I want to think of prizes as like payment that's happening after the uncertainty has been realized, and grants are payments that are being that they're happening before uncertainty is realized? So is this a question of like I can't do everything through prizes because I can't commit? Like if I could commit to give prizes to things that failed, then grants wouldn't be necessary.
In a sense, there are two forms of prizes if you think about it. And this I'm speaking a bit broadly here. On the one hand, there are prizes, maybe you define exactly what you want, like longitude prize. I want this, and but then you have to make sure you know what you want. Yeah, and so you can commit sometimes but you need to know what is a useful innovation, and that sometimes is quite difficult to define ex ante. But also there are prizes that allow ex post recognizing things that have been turned out to be useful. You think about Nobel Prize that goes a bit in that direction. But the question there, you cannot define it ex ante to some extent.
I guess what I'm trying to.
And there are also ex post funds. Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at is that if I could commit to whatever prizes, like even to give prizes to terrible things, no monotone prizes, something like this, then supposedly I could exactly replicate whatever the grant is doing. So prizes would be like just
potentially because
better,
you can condition potentially that's a useful additional power.
Prize or something like that could replicate exactly as happening to the grant, right?
I think so.
But I suppose there's some limited commitment. Like I won't be able to say to actually implement no monotone prizes in the real world.
Yeah.
And somehow that's why grants are important.
Yeah, but also I mean the practice. I think there is other issue that with a price that the payment would be ex post, maybe conditional on some verification, and these are very difficult to verify characteristics. Then can you actually leverage and borrow against that if you're liquidity constrained, correct? Right. That's also another important consideration. I think all these are very interesting questions and wide open to actually think conceptually and model it in a deep way. Yeah, but I fully agree with you. Yes.
So I guess if maybe partially building on that, but a bit more like I guess fundamental question here, where like in all the models you've shown us, there's some like true quality that we in principle agree on socially, right? But like I mean that might also be a difference between like how economists versus say sociologists or historians of science might think of this, where it's more like what questions are interesting, what methods are credible is something that's kind of collectively negotiated within different fields and subfields. And so that makes it a lot harder to think about what's even true quality, right? Or I mean I don't think that the EU Commission has like a well-defined measure of like what is relevant and true science as opposed to not. And maybe that's why we have peer review to begin with, to outsource it in some sense to sub-communities. But that's
No, that's interesting. In a sense that the quality itself is endogenous to the system to some extent. What people perceive to be good is good.
at the minimum it's multidimensional, right? Like,
Correct.
I mean, some people think particle physics is interesting.
Correct.
Some people think whatever.
No, when I for example, in some of my work, I extend the model to the multidimensional setting, which is relevant for the selection, for example, in which field do I want to go when I have a multidimensional characteristic and so on. And so along the lines of Roy's kind of model, and some of this can be pushed in that direction in a very interesting, elegant way, I must say. But the more generally, there is some scope to be done on thinking about this, what is really, the type, the quality is more endogenous to the system than it is in this simple framework.
And it does relate, I guess, to how we think about something like innovativeness versus being conservative relative to existing fields, right? Like, do we want, like, in some sense, to create new sub-communities interested in new questions?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, there are interesting conceptual issues to be addressed, I think, for economics. We don't have a baseline model for that, correct? I hope you realize that, and I think there is value to having a model, and so we have a model that roughly I'm building a relatively familiar way of doing things now, but there is scope to be done of trying to conceptualize more. Also, the level of disagreement there is, and we know in science, there is a lot of we are discovering new knowledge, and we have to, in a way. If we knew everything already, there wouldn't be no purpose for research. So we have limited understanding of what is true, what is not true. Yeah, and so all these things clearly maybe they need to be modeled to some extent if you want to make progress on this and try to think about funding as well. But there is need for much more fundamental modeling as well.
I think
about the development of knowledge.
This inclination to think like there's this one-dimensional quality ranking of scientists, right?
Which is simplistic. Yeah. Yes. But I agree. But you can actually allow also the different, multidimensional quality. You have different skills, multidimensional skills, and that can be extended in this framework. I've done it. Yeah. Okay. Great. But these are, great questions, and I look forward to more discussion.
Right. Thanks so much. Excellent opening.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so we'll continue at 2:15 here with Caroline's talk, and for the speakers we'll have lunch.
So we have a version of the paper with more the toy models as well in the appendix. In this MBR entrepreneurship and innovation policy and economy. For next volume there will be an article of this kind of complementing with Azoulay and Lee on the empirical side. A few years ago, this will be on the theory side. That's basically the draft paper is on the web. Yeah. Any feedback is most appreciated.
Could I